So our final speaker is somebody I think you're going to really enjoy hearing from. It's Antony Jenkins, who is the global CEO of Barclays Retail Banking. He was appointed the chief executive of global retail banking in 2009 after a 28-year career in the finance sector. He's responsible for all of Barclays' retail businesses around the world, employing over 70,000 people and 37 million customers worldwide. And he's also head of diversity and inclusion at Barclays. Two other quick facts about him. I think one, in the interview or the article in the Telegraph when he was appointed to his new role, the Telegraph, the UK publication, talked about him as the nice guy of banking, which I think is a great way of summing it up. And he also comes from the same part of the north of England that I do, where we have the weather you saw this morning. So please give a great one young world welcome to Antony Jenkins.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, good. You're all still with me. My name's Antony Jenkins. As David said, I've been in the financial services industry for almost 30 years, before many of you were born. And I'm going to share with you some brief thoughts on the state of the world, the state of capitalism, the state of banking, and to put it bluntly, what we need to do about it. Because I think we'd all agree it's not where it is and not where it needs to be. Now, I work for an institution that's 300 years old, and you don't survive 300 years by not reacting to and not embracing the changes that the world puts upon you. And I take that obligation very seriously, just as I take the obligation and honor of being one of your counselors very seriously. And I'd like to just take a couple of seconds to say why I take it so seriously. Firstly, because although people around the world, all of us on the planet, have very different economic and other circumstances, we are all basically human beings, and we are all part of humanity. And in that regard, we are all equal, with equal rights and responsibilities. Our start points, our economic circumstances may not be equal, but our basic humanity is. The second thing I'd like to just mention in this context is time. Time is the most valuable resource any of us have here. And let me give you a short story about time. My dad was one of 7 children, and the youngest child is called Chris. And Chris is a year older than me. Now, Chris and I grew up together, and I was very jealous of Chris because Chris lived in a house, and behind that house was a massive manufacturing plant that made potato chips or crisps. And Chris was a year or 2 older than me, and he was always a bit more streetwise and savvy, and he managed to convince me that periodically, off the conveyor belt that ran down the back of this factory, would fall a box of potato chips into Chris's garden. In effect, manna from heaven for Chris. And when you're 9 or 10, a box of potato chips or crisps landing in your garden is kind of a big deal. And Chris convinced me of this, and yet every time I visited him, somehow it never quite happened. I just missed the last arrival of the potato chips. And I remember this story, and as I got older, I still don't know whether it was true or not. But last night, very sadly, I attended Chris's memorial service. Because last week, Chris died. And Chris died at the age of 51. So he was on this planet for 51 years, which, if you think about it in the context of 13 billion years that the universe has been in existence, is no time at all. So we're all here for a very short period of time. And that brings me to my third point, and that's about impact. And I think leadership is fundamentally about impact. And as human beings, we all have both the opportunity and the obligation to have impact in the world in which we live. It might be huge impact, like a Nelson Mandela, like a Gandhi. It might be tiny impact of helping a neighbor, of helping a small community. It might be addressing issues like climate change. It might be changing the way banking and capitalism works. But I believe all of us have an opportunity to have impact in the world. And that's why I'm so excited to be talking to all of you, because I already know from your backgrounds that you are having impact in the world, and that this program will help you have even greater impact in that very short period of time that we are all on this planet. Now, I'm an optimist about life, and I think if you look at airports, you've all come through an airport to come here. I did this morning. Airports are a great example of many of the very, very good things about the world. They're global. People can travel around the world cheaply. It provides great experiences. If you look at the people at the airport, they come of all different shapes and sizes and races and ages. And this reflects many of the positive things that I see in the world today. Longevity. Everybody's living longer. Quality of life. Now, it's not true everywhere in the world. I spend a lot of time in Africa myself. I love Africa also, so I take my hat off to you guys over here. I love Africa, but there is a lot of poverty in Africa. There's a lot of poverty in other parts of the world. But if you look at the history of mankind, the quality of life on average for most people on the planet today is higher than it's ever been and richer than it's ever been. And why is that? It's because of something called general purpose technologies. These are fundamental technologies that underpin the way society works. Think about steam power, think about electricity, think about aviation, automobiles, internet. All of those things are fundamental technologies. And as those technologies have grown, they've improved the quality of life for people on this planet. Not uniformly, not for everybody, but on average they have. And the good news is there are more and more general purpose technologies coming. So they're the reasons to be cheerful. But on the downside, there are a lot of issues in this world. A lot of issues in this world. The first are demographics. We heard in the previous session how the population's growing. We know the population is also aging in the Western world. That creates all sorts of strains on the resources of the planet. The second is the environment. Again, we heard about that previously. It doesn't matter whether you believe in the fact that climate change is man-made or not. The climate is clearly changing, and that is going to have profound impacts for many different parts of the world. The third is the global economy. We all know that the global economy is in a weak state. It's in a very, very weak state from the US across Western Europe. And even in the developing world, economies are weakening because we live in an interconnected world. And fourthly, and perhaps most worryingly and concerning, is the notion of fairness and sustainability. Sustainability is all about how do we make the world richer in a broader sense, not just about financially, but in terms of quality of life, in a sustainable fashion. But it's also about how that riches gets distributed between the have and the have-nots, the rich and the poor, the old and the young, this generation and the next, the developing world, the developed world. And my view is that all of these problems are very, very significant, very long-term problems that the institutions of the world are struggling to deal with. And why are the institutions of the world struggling to deal with that? Because the institutions of the world are fundamentally short-term focused. And I'd include the political environment in that, and I would certainly include capitalism, business, and particularly financial services. And if you look at the reasons underlying the credit crisis and the credit crunch, they come back to short-term focus on profitability at the expense of everything else. And if you look at the political world, the problems are driven by politicians wanting to get elected next time around. So if we're going to change the world, we're going to have to change how institutions and how society and how civil society works. And that brings me back to leadership, because leadership has never been more important than it is today. And for me, leadership has three key elements. It doesn't matter whether it's massive, country, history-changing leadership, leadership in your local community, leadership in a business, leadership in your own family. Leadership has three elements. The first element is being able to conceive of, envisage a future that is different than it is today. What is that legacy? What is that impact that we want to achieve? The second is being able to put together a plan to deliver that impact, to deliver that legacy. And the third thing, and this is the most important thing, is to be both relentless and authentic. Why relentless? Because change is hard. Human beings don't like change. Human beings don't like making short-term sacrifice for long-term gain. It's not in our nature. So if we're going to do something different, if we're going to change, we have to be relentless. Relentlessly focused on the impact that we want to achieve in the world. And the second is authentic. Because it's no good saying one thing and doing another. It's no good saying, as an organization, we're committed to sustainable manufacturing, to sustainable banking, and then not addressing the carbon that your business creates. David mentioned that I lead diversity for Barclays. When I first joined Barclays in 2006, I got asked specifically a question on diversity, on gender diversity, because my executive team consisted of 8 white, middle-aged males. In other words, 0 diversity. And I was challenged. I said, they said, you talk about diversity, look at your team. So I did something about it. I changed it, and now we have about a 50-50 gender balance in the team. But if you're not authentic as a leader, then you won't succeed. And that brings me to business, to capitalism, and financial services. And everybody in this room, I think, would agree that the way business has been done to date needs to change. In many ways, capitalism has been a fundamental engine of growth and the development of humanity. It has lifted tens, if not hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. But there is a downside to capitalism, and that downside is it is essentially too short-term focused. So at Barclays, we have said we want to do 3 things. Firstly, we want to manage our business on a balanced basis, recognizing all the stakeholders that we have to serve, our customers, our shareholders, the broader communities where we do business, and our colleagues. And we need to optimize and manage those interests in the long and the short term. Secondarily, we've said that we want to put the customer at the heart of the business. We have a vision which we call Lives Made Much Easier, and it's about recognizing that a bank is in business to help customers do things that are important to them in their lives. Buy a home, save for education, start a business. And the easier we can make those things for our customers, the more loyalty we'll have, the more business we'll have, the happier customers we'll have. But the third thing that we've said is we want, as an organization, to be a force for good in the communities where we do business. And, of course, we already do a lot of what is traditionally termed corporate social responsibility. We donate about £60 million, about $100 million a year, to various causes around the world, and that's good. And I myself have seen this money in action. I've seen it in action in Uganda, I've seen it in Kenya, I've seen it in the UK and in the US. In Uganda, for example, we're supporting projects to allow small villages to create little mini banks where people put money into the bank and can take money out in microloans to help buy cows, buy seed, build a well, and that then creates economic activity. And many of the members of that scheme have then gone on to be able to educate their children at university and create better lives for them and their families. And that's good. We've enhanced that by using a capability we have as a bank, which is to fix a problem that that scheme has. And the problem is that as the scheme gets more successful, there's more and more money sitting in the village. and that provides risk. So now we open a bank account for the village using capability that we have as an organization. But force for good is more than that. Force for good is about being conscious of every action that we as an organization take and being conscious that it has an impact in the world where we do business. Every loan we approve, every loan we turn down, the amount of tax we pay, our compensation policies, the sorts of companies we do business with, all of these things, we need to apply the lens of, does this create benefit for society? Is it neutral? Or is it negative for society? Now, we run a for-profit business, so sometimes we will have to do things that have negative benefits to society. You can't take an airline flight without creating carbon. You can buy credits to offset it, but the carbon's still there in the economy. But it's about applying that lens back to the first idea I said of balance, of thinking about each of the constituents that we have to serve over time. Now, I'm sure some of you are sitting there feeling this sounds quite fluffy and you may be cynical about what I'm saying. And in some ways, I don't blame you, because the banking industry and capitalism has not got a great track record, particularly in the last 3 or 4 years. And in some ways, I respect that cynicism. And I find that cynicism gives me energy, because if I go back to what I said at the start about legacy and impact, one of the things that we've committed to do at Barclays is to try and build the next generation of bank, incorporating all these ideas of managing for each of our stakeholders, putting our customers at the center of what we do, and being a force for good in society. It will take time. It will require us to be relentless and authentic, as I said. But it is a journey we are absolutely committed to. You can criticize us for not having achieved it, but you can't criticize us for our intent to achieve it. And that's the fundamental difference. And what you should expect from us is to look at gradual progress in the direction that I've laid out. And so that brings me to the conclusion of my remarks. I will just say these 2 things to you. Firstly, I am optimistic about the world, but I acknowledge the world has lots of challenges. We all have an opportunity to make the world a better place. I've talked to you about the things that I personally am committed to. I would ask you these 2 questions to close. What are you personally committed to changing in the world? And more importantly, how can I and my fellow councillors at One Young World help you achieve that change? Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Anthony. And ladies and gentlemen, as the boat is already roaring outside on the lake, we have time for 4 questions, and you have known the rules of the game, which means each microphone, the first speaker, and 1 from the audience. So take it away.
Hi, I'm Prabdeep, representing American Express. As another financial services company, I see this question of financial inclusion that you brought up, the concept of bringing basic financial services.
Could you just hold 1 sec? Could you please stay seated for these 4 Q&As? That would be quite nice, then we wrap up. So,
financial inclusion, the concept of bringing basic banking services to rural parts of the world today. India, for this, is a big requirement. You're doing a little bit in Barclays, in Uganda. What can we at a ground level do to drive this kind of a shift within financial organizations? And is there any leadership among the banking industry to move to this, which could both be a social and a profit center with new customers?
Well, we're doing a lot of work in South Africa on basic bank accounts. And you can't deliver banking accounts in the way you would do it in the developed world. It's just too expensive, branch networks and so on. So I think it's all about, firstly, recognizing that's a need, secondarily, making it a priority, which we are doing, and then I think learning from each other, because we're very big in Africa in Barclays, we're not big in India. And maybe there are other organizations in India that could step up and learn from us as we can learn from other people in other parts of the world. But the most important thing is, A, making it a priority, Remember I said the 3 things about leadership. Make it a priority, have a plan, and then be relentless and authentic. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question.
Yes, I am Pumlani. I'm from South Africa. I'm going to start by saying, answering your question, what is my commitment? My commitment is actually to end capitalism. I think it disgusts me, and it's just, I just want to say that.
Remember the 40-second rule. Thank you for your statement.
So I just want to say that categorically.
To end capitalism.
Yeah, it's not a question as it is, just an observation. First, you said people are not equal. You said people are equal. And I think I'd like to disagree with that. If they're equal, why would they not be given grants or loans when they don't have a house? If I had 5 children without a life insurance, without a car, you would not give me a loan. So
I think those 40 seconds are almost up, so maybe you want to give an answer to that?
So very quickly, firstly, you and I may not be as far apart as you think in terms of, you say end capitalism, I say change capitalism. Secondarily, I talked about equality in terms of us as human beings on this planet. I did not say everybody had the same resources or the same opportunities. And I think that comes back to the issue of fairness, which we have to get much better at in both the developing and the developed world. So I have no objection to what you're saying in principle. I think it's all about the mechanisms of how we do that. At the end of the day, society has to decide what it wants to spend its money on. That's a decision for politicians, for banks, and for broader society. The
gentleman in the middle.
I'm Joel Richard from Zurich, and I would like to know if you think if you have to change the system, the economy system, capitalism, or just the surface. Is it possible to solve all the problems we have without changing the system deeper than just on the surface? What do you think?
Thank you.
I don't think it can be a superficial change. There is a lot of work going on around the world now about what good capitalism really looks like, what capitalism 2.0 really looks like. But at its heart, it has the same elements of you have to recognize that business has to serve its customers, broader society, and its employees, not just the bottom line, not just short-term profits. And it's about the short and the long term. And I think that that is quite a profound change for capitalism, and I think it's a structural change. Now, how we get there over time is going to require a lot of thought, but that's the direction I think we must go in.
Antony, you've got a gender-balanced team. Here is the last question of this afternoon.
Okay. Hi, my name is Dania. I'm from Libya, and I just wanted to kind of give you a small statement. My grandfather, he basically owned a school for orphans, and what this school was is basically he made the students depend on themselves. So what the school was is basically he built, it was an orphanage. The government did not help him with anything, and he built stores inside of the school for the students to depend on themselves. So if you kind of did that or kind of implemented the same idea, that's a way for you to make money and have the students depend on themselves, because if you're educated, you don't need to worry about anything else, because you'll ultimately be able to have equal opportunity with other people.
Thank you for that comment.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think education is the single biggest thing that changes people's lives. And a lot of what we do at Barclays is focused on that. And we're shifting a lot of resources towards education because of exactly the reason that you said.
And you can make money too.
That's the best sort of good capitalism. Good capitalism solves problems in society, but is also good for the shareholder. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I've just got thumbs up for 2 more questions. If you're please disciplined, you will start off, and then the gentleman in the middle, and that's it.
My name is Oponya Innocent. I'm from the Pearl of Africa. That's Uganda, of course. And you talk about leadership, and you talk about your project being implemented in Uganda. And I felt really like I have a lot to say about it, given some few minutes. But the point is, I really am so much into leadership, and I have too much ambition that I'll be aspiring for Member of Parliament for my hometown in 2016. But the greatest challenge comes because in most cases, leadership in my country is not so open and free. And so we get the fear, we as youths of the country, because we fear the opposition. We don't have that big money to compete with these people, whom in the process, you find like you are risking your life because you want to save others. And so it's really challenging. And I don't know whether your organization or your body has something to do with this to help us who feel like we have something to do for our people, to also come up and stand for the people. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I've spent a lot of time in Africa, and I do feel very optimistic and positive about the prospects for Africa, but the problem that you've raised is a real one in many parts of the continent. It is, of course, a political one, and therefore needs to be addressed primarily in the political sphere. But as a business, we are committed to the growth of Africa and to helping support countries in Africa where it is quite challenging to do business. And there are some countries where we've stayed even while it's been difficult to do business. So I think we should look primarily to political institutions to help with the sorts of issues that you've raised rather than commercial ones.
This gentleman, and unfortunately that was really the last one.
Hi, I'm Swagat from India. And I just wanted to ask you one very general question. So today a lot of companies have CSR initiatives, but most of them just talk about profit. What about being more than profit? I mean, you have your profits, but you have a positive social impact as well. What about a socio-capitalistic model of business rather than just a capitalistic model? I mean, what's your view on it, and how can the global businesses, go on the same track?
Well, I essentially believe that capitalism has to evolve from being focused entirely on short-term profitability to being focused on serving all of its stakeholders in the short and the long term. Now, harmonizing and balancing those things is very challenging because, frankly, if you don't have shareholders, you aren't going to have capital, you aren't going to have a business. So shareholders need to be served, but in fact, serving the broader interests serves shareholders better, ultimately. So what you're starting to see in the world now is a dialogue around these issues, and organizations like ours beginning to address them. And it's not just us. I mean, Unilever's here. They'll talk about the great things they're doing. There are many other companies doing great things in this space. But we just had a new group chief executive at Barclays. He set 4 priorities. 3 of them were financial, but the 4th priority was citizenship. And every time Bob talks about that, he talks about citizenship. So it's right at the top of our company, and we are committed to making these changes. As I said, like all change, it's difficult, but relentless authenticity will get you there. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for your short question.